This video is all about finding the critical players in a winning coalition in a weighted voting system. So first we should review the definition. A player is critical if that coalition wins when that player is present and loses if that player leaves. It's very important to remember though that if it's not a winning coalition, we don't even try to find critical players because it doesn't make any sense. So let's look at an example here. I have 4 players, quota is 10. Player 1 has weight 6, player 2 has weight 4, and players 3 and 4 have weight 3. Now I need a winning coalition. So here's my proposed coalition, player 1, 2, and 3. If we look at it, this coalition has weight 13, so it is a winning coalition because 6 plus 4 plus 3 is 13. So let's look at player 1. If player 1 leaves the coalition, we have player 2 and player 3 left behind. Player 2 has weight 4, and player 3 has weight 3, so this makes a total of 7. 7 is less than 10, which means that if player 1 leaves, the coalition formed by players 2 and 3 is no longer a winning coalition. So player 1 is a critical member of this coalition. Good. 7 is less than 10. So same thing, just clearing it off Sussman. Let's look at player 2. Player 2 leaves, and we are left with the coalition formed by player 1 and player 3. This has a total weight of 9, because player 1 has weight 6, and player 3 has weight 3, and 6 plus 3 is 9. Player 2 is critical because if player 2 leaves, we only have weight 9, and 9 is less than 10. So player 2 is critical. And now, let's look at player 3. Player 3 leaves, we are left with player 1 and player 2. They have a total weight of 10, so that means that player 3 is not critical because the coalition formed by player 1 and player 2 is enough to win. So player 3's presence wasn't really necessary. So player 3 is not critical. So to sum up here, player 1 and player 2 are critical and player 3 was not. Now this only applies to this particular coalition. We could form other coalitions where player 3 is critical, or player 1 is not critical, or player 2 is not critical. So if we want to look at a different coalition, we have to start over and go through this whole process again. So I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to look at the 2-player coalition of player 1 and player 2. Remember, that has weight 10, so that is enough to win. So if player 1 leaves, player 2 is left behind, which has weight 4, which is definitely not enough to win. So player 1 is critical in this coalition. If I look at player 2, if player 2 leaves, player 1 is left behind. Player 1 has weight 6. 6 is less than 10, so that means that player 2 is critical. We need both of them in order to make this a winning coalition. So in this particular coalition, both players were critical, and that can happen. I clicked too fast, but here's my next example. This is a different weighted voting system for variety. So once again, we're going to look at the coalition of player 1, player 2, and player 3. This coalition has total weight 14, which is bigger than 9, so that's the winning coalition, so we can proceed on. Player 1 leaves, we are left with player 2 and player 3, which has weight 9, which is enough to win. So that means that player 1 is not critical because player 2 and player 3 can win together. Player 2 leaves, then player 1 and player 3 are left behind, and that has total weight 9 as well. So that means that player 2 is not critical. And if player 3 leaves, we are left with player 1 and player 2, which has weight 10, which is still bigger than 9, so that's enough to win. So player 3 is not critical. So in this example, no one was critical, which is okay. That can happen. So basically, sometimes players are critical and sometimes they're not. Sometimes everybody's critical. Sometimes it's possible to have none of them be critical. Really, anything can happen and you can't really predict it. So you just have to go through and try.